Have you ever felt invisible, even when you're standing right in the middle of the people you love most? That feeling when your presence is simply taken for granted, like the air you breathe, only noticed when it's gone. You're the one who cleans up the messes, who mends the fractures, who silently sacrifices your own dreams for the bigger picture called family. You don't ask for a medal, you just hope for the smallest acknowledgement. But instead, all you get is silence. A silence so heavy it nearly turns you into a ghost in your own home. I lived in that shadow for 3 years. 3 years, 1,095 days. I gave up a prestigious full-ride scholarship, putting my own future on hold to carry the family legacy through a storm. I became the accountant, the negotiator, the manager, and the nurse. I thought my sacrifice was the foundation to rebuild our family, but I was wrong. And on that fateful night, at a party that was supposed to celebrate the company's revival, my own family, the very people I had spent my youth protecting, looked me straight in the eye and told me I was no longer welcome. They didn't just say it, they held a meeting, they voted, and the motion was passed.
The reason they gave? They said I was unstable, that I was toxic, that I was a threat to their new vision.
And as you can see, our projections for the next quarter are looking exceptionally strong.
Sounds like a cheap family soap opera, doesn't it? But here's the cold, hard truth they didn't know. This wasn't a misunderstanding, not a moment of impulse. This was a meticulously calculated plan to seize everything I had built. A plan to make me the villain, to push me out with nothing, while they gutted the company from the inside. They thought they had covered all their bases. They thought I was just the operations girl, that I couldn't understand their high-level moves. They thought I would break down and cry. But they forgot one thing. When you spend 3 years managing a dying business, you don't just learn about numbers. You learn to read people. You learn to find the truth hidden behind the lies. And most importantly, you learn to prepare for the worst-case scenario. In today's video, I'm not just going to tell you the story of how I was betrayed by my own family. I am going to show you, step by step, how I used their condescension as a weapon, turning the information they thought I could never understand into the key that flipped the entire board on the very night they thought they had won. This isn't a story about revenge. This is a lesson in strategic self-defense, about turning your perceived weaknesses into your greatest strengths. If you've ever felt underestimated, taken advantage of, or are facing an uphill battle, then stay with me. Because what you're about to see might just be the roadmap to reclaiming your own value and your own voice. To understand the coldness in my father's eyes that night, and the smug smile on the face of the sister I once adored, we have to go back 3 years to a world that seemed much simpler. A world built on concrete, steel, and promises kept. Our family business, Miller Construction Supplies, wasn't a glamorous corporation. It was the beating heart of our small Ohio town. The office always smelled faintly of pine wood and cement dust, a scent that, to me, was the smell of hard work and honesty. My father, David, built it from the ground up. He was a practical man who believed in hard numbers and a firm handshake. He taught me about ledgers before I learned to drive, showing me how cash flow was the lifeblood of a business. I spent my summers not on vacation, but organizing the warehouse, optimizing the supply chain and learning every corner of the small empire he had created. And I loved it. I loved the clear logic, the tangible results of the work. Meanwhile, my older sister Brooke lived in a completely different universe, one illuminated by the neon lights of Los Angeles and filtered through the perfect veneer of Instagram. She didn't build with brick and mortar, but with a personal brand. Her world was photo shoots, networking parties, and sponsored posts for products she probably never actually used. Our worlds couldn't have been more different. My dusty ledgers and her social media mood board. That contrast was also clear in how our parents saw us. My father was proud of my business acumen, but it was a quiet pride, expressed in a satisfied nod when I found an accounting discrepancy. My mother, Susan, was the opposite. She was infatuated with Brooke's virtual fame. She would brag to her book club friends about her daughter's follower count, seeing it as a measure of real success. I was never jealous, because I believed everyone had their own path. I didn't realize that in my mother's eyes, my path was just a safe side street, while Brooke's was the highway to the stars. Everything changed one April afternoon, when a thick envelope with the Northwestern University logo sat in our mailbox. It wasn't just an acceptance letter. It was a full scholarship for their economics program. I was holding my future in my hands, a piece of paper that smelled of fresh ink and promised a life beyond our small Ohio town. I pictured the grand lecture halls, the fiery debates, a career of my own making. Then, one phone call changed everything. My mother called, her voice breaking over the phone. Dad had collapsed at the company, a massive heart attack. My world shrank to sterile white hospital corridors and the smell of antiseptic. The doctor spoke of a complicated prognosis, a long recovery, and close monitoring. As I watched my father lying in a hospital bed tangled in wires, I saw Miller Supplies, his legacy, as just as fragile. Who would manage the orders? Who would pay the employees? Who would keep the ship from sinking? That night, I sat alone in my room, the Northwestern letter on my desk. On one side was the brilliant future I had dreamed of. On the other was my family on the brink of collapse, the life's work of a man fighting for his own life. I called Brooke. She picked up amidst the loud music of some Hollywood event. When I told her about Dad, she was silent for a moment, then sighed. "Oh my God, that's horrible, Clara. I'd love to come home, but this week is just critical. I have a meeting with a potential investor for my brand. You know how it is, can't miss it. You hold down the fort, okay? Send Dad my love. Hold down the fort." The phrase echoed in my head. After I hung up, I looked at the letter one last time, then slowly, deliberately, I tore it in two. My future could wait. My family could not. At that moment, I had no idea that the act of sacrifice I thought was my noblest was the first stone paving the road to the greatest betrayal of my life. I had willingly stepped into the shadows, never knowing that there were people waiting there, not to thank me, but to extinguish my light completely. 3 years didn't pass in the blink of an eye. They were a long, endless chain of early mornings and sleepless nights. My life was no longer that of a woman in her early 20s. I had become an operating machine. My day started before sunrise, checking emails from suppliers, preparing Dad's medication, and reviewing accounts receivable and payable. At lunch, I'd rush through a sandwich at my desk while on the phone with insurance companies, arguing over every single claim for Dad's treatment. In the evenings, I'd sit by his bed, reading him business news, and after he fell asleep, I'd return to the ledgers, trying to find a way to balance a budget that was getting tighter every day. My high school friends faded away. Invitations for coffee or a movie became distant memories. I became a ghost in my own youth. Someone my friends would say, "Oh, Clara? She's busy." They weren't wrong. I was busy keeping my family's world from falling apart. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Brooke's world was blooming, brighter and more expensive than ever. Her Instagram was a perfect portrait of success. There were lavish brunches in Beverly Hills, weekend trips to Palm Springs, cocktails by infinity pools overlooking the city skyline. She posted stories about hustle culture, about building her own fashion empire from the ground up. But those ground-up efforts always seemed to require a subsidy. The calls home began. At first it was, "Clara, rent is a little high this month. Can you ask Mom to send me a little something?" Gradually, it became, "I need to invest in a new fabric shipment. This is a huge opportunity." My mother, Susan, was always willing. She saw it as investing in Brooke's future. Every time I cautiously mentioned the mounting medical bills, Mom would brush it aside. "Brooke needs to maintain her image, sweetie. It's essential for her career." I stayed silent, swallowing the bitter taste of injustice. I was saving every penny, while my sister was spending money on her image. The most devastating truth came to light on a cold November evening. The company was facing a severe cash flow crisis. A major supplier threatened to cut us off if we didn't pay our overdue balance. I knew we needed a short-term business loan to get through it. To apply, I needed the deed for the company property and our family home, which had long been paid off and was a solid piece of collateral. I went into my father's office, where he kept all the important documents in an old metal file cabinet. I searched for the property deed file, and then I saw it. Tucked underneath the original file was a newer sky blue folder. The label read, "Personal Finances, 2024. My hand trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a set of loan agreements, a mortgage contract. My heart stopped. I scanned the terms, the numbers dancing before my eyes. Our family home, our pride and security, had been remortgaged. The number made me gasp. $250,000. But what nearly brought me to my knees was the date on the contract and the beneficiary. It was signed 6 months ago, right when Dad's medical costs were at their peak. And the money hadn't gone into the company's account, nor was it used to pay the hospital. It was wired directly to a limited liability company based in Los Angeles. The name of that company, Brooke Lifestyle Brands, LLC, was a knife twisting in my chest. That night, I showed the file to my mother after Dad was asleep. I didn't scream. My voice was ice. "What is this, Mom?" My mother avoided my gaze. She fidgeted with the hem of her apron. "Well, this. Your father and I didn't want to worry you. Brooke needed a large investment to scale up her business. She said it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." "A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity?" I repeated, my voice beginning to shake. "Do you know that last week I had to beg the power company not to shut off our electricity? Do you know I had to use my own meager personal savings to pay 2 of the warehouse workers? You took the last safety net this family had. To fund her social media photos?" My mother finally looked at me, but her eyes held not remorse, but defensiveness. "You don't understand, Clara. You're used to this old-fashioned business. Brooke's world is different. It requires risky investments. This is for your sister's future." "For her future," I whispered. And in that moment, I understood. I wasn't the silent hero. I was just a temporary solution. My sacrifice wasn't a foundation. It was just a cushion for someone else to jump higher. That night, something inside me grew cold and hard. My innocence died, and a quiet, cold resolve was born from its ashes. That spring came not just with blooming flowers, but with signs of life returning to our home. My father, David, made a remarkable recovery. At first, it was just being able to sit up on his own, then slow, deliberate steps around the living room. Gradually, he began asking me for the weekly business reports. The sharpness returned to his eyes as he asked insightful questions about profit margins, new contracts, and the efficiency of the warehouse management system I had implemented. Every sign of his recovery lit a fragile spark of hope in me. Maybe things would be okay. Maybe my sacrifice was almost over. Maybe when Dad was fully recovered, he would look at what I had done, clap me on the shoulder, and tell me he was proud. That hope, however small, was enough to warm the past 3 cold years. He did praise me. "You've done a great job, Clara. These numbers are impressive." But in his voice, I was still the daughter who was helping out. Not a partner, not a true successor. Still, I clung to that hope. And then, when my father was well enough to sit at the head of the table for a family dinner, they returned. Brooke and her fiancé, Chad, arrived from Los Angeles not with weariness or remorse, but with a vibrant, confident energy. Chad, whom I had only met over video calls, strode into our Ohio home like a visiting king. He wore an expensive suit, gave my father a firm handshake, and charmed my mother with a hug. He complimented the house with practiced ease, then turned to me with a smile that immediately felt wrong. "Clara," he said, his voice smooth as velvet, "I've heard so much about you. You've done a phenomenal job keeping things running. It's truly admirable." His words were kind, but his eyes were assessing me like a piece of property. That night at dinner, they began to present their vision. Chad spoke of synergy, of scaling to a national market, of disruptive impact in the digital construction materials space. He threw around a volley of trendy business terms that left my father, who had been out of the game for 3 years, looking deeply impressed and excited. My mother, needless to say, looked at Chad as if he were a prophet. "Miller Supplies has a fantastic foundation," Chad concluded, "but it needs a push to get to the next level. Brooke and I have mapped out a strategic plan to do just that." My heart began to beat uncomfortably. A plan? A strategy? I was the one who had been mapping out plans and strategies to save the company for 3 years. I spoke up, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's the specific plan, Chad?" "Our cash flow still needs to be managed very carefully." Chad smiled lightly, a smile that was slightly condescending. "Oh, the details are a bit complex, Clara. It involves capital restructuring and penetrating new distribution channels. To begin, I'll need full server access and all the company's financial data to conduct my due diligence." My father nodded immediately. "Of course. Clara, give Chad everything he needs." That night, after creating a guest account for Chad with limited access, an inexplicable sense of unease kept me awake. I went back to the office, telling myself I was just double-checking the security settings. And that's when I saw it. In a temporary folder on the local network, there was a file Chad must have forgotten to delete after disconnecting. It wasn't named anything suspicious, just a simple Project Phoenix. Curious, I opened it. It wasn't a business plan, it was a death warrant. The first page was a strategic summary. Miller Supplies Asset Liquidation Strategy, 18-month timeline. My heart started hammering in my chest. I scrolled through the next slides. The titles hit me like punches to the gut. Phase 1, sell core real estate assets. Phase 2, reduce headcount by 60%. Phase 3, outsource operations to third party. Phase 4, maximize capital extraction and dissolve company. This wasn't a growth plan. This was a heist. Chad and Brooke were planning to turn the company my father spent his life building, the company I sacrificed my youth to preserve, into an empty shell, drain it for cash, and discard it. That $250,000 mortgage wasn't for brand building. It was the seed money for this very attack. I sat frozen in the darkness of the office, the light from the monitor illuminating my face. Every piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Brooke's selfishness, my parents' blindness, and now, Chad's vicious greed. I was no longer facing a family injustice. I was facing a calculated enemy. The game had changed. And I realized if I didn't write the rules myself, I was about to be wiped off the board. The cold resolve that had been forming inside me for months now had a clear target, and it would not be silent anymore. The initial shock quickly gave way to a cold, sharp clarity. I didn't storm into the living room and scream. I didn't cry or despair. Instead, a terrifying calm washed over me. I spent the rest of the night in the office, printing out all 20 pages of Project Phoenix. I bound it carefully into a document, just like any other business report I had ever prepared. The next morning, I waited until my mother had gone out and Brooke and Chad were still upstairs. I walked into my father's study, where he was reading the Wall Street Journal. He smiled when he saw me, a warm smile that, just a day before, might have melted my heart. Now, I only felt a profound sadness. "Good morning, Dad," I said, my voice even. "I have something I need you to see." I placed the document on the desk in front of him. He put on his glasses and curiously turned to the first page. I watched his expression change from curiosity to confusion, then to a frown. He flipped through the next pages faster, his eyes scanning the cold titles: asset liquidation, headcount reduction. When he finished, he looked up at me, but the anger in his eyes was not directed at the plan. It was directed at me. "What is this?" he asked, his tone sharp. "Where did you get this?" "It was in a temp folder on the server after Chad used it," I explained calmly. "This isn't a growth plan, Dad. This is a death sentence for the company." My father slammed his hand on the desk, an action that made me flinch. "Don't be ridiculous, Clara. You don't understand high-level strategy. This is obviously just a contingency plan, a thought exercise to analyze worst-case scenarios. Chad is a thorough man. He's looking at every angle." "A thought exercise that includes a detailed plan for capital extraction and dissolving the company?" I asked, unable to believe his denial. "Read it carefully, Dad. This is a plan for a heist." And then he said the words that shattered any remaining illusion I had of his validation. "I think you're jealous," he said, his voice full of disappointment. "You've done a fine job with operations, but you don't have the vision. You can't accept that Brooke and Chad are bringing in big ideas that could actually change the game. Let the professionals do their work, and you do your part." I stared at him. 3 years of sacrifice, 3 years of grinding work, 3 years of saving his company. All of it was dismissed as petty jealousy. My expertise was operations, while their conspiracy was vision. I didn't say another word. I quietly collected the papers, turned, and walked out of the office. As that door closed, I knew another door inside my heart had closed forever. The path to seeking my parents' approval was over. From now on, I was on my own. That night, I called Leo, my one remaining best friend. I told him everything, my voice steady, filled only with a bottomless exhaustion. Leo listened in silence, then said the one simple thing I needed to hear most. "They're gaslighting you, Clara. You're not crazy. You're the only sane one in that entire house." Leo's words were like a breath of fresh air. I wasn't crazy. I was right. And if no one would listen to the truth, then I would force them to confront it. I didn't sleep that night. I acted. My plan began to form. I knew a PowerPoint printout wasn't enough. They could easily deny it, call it a draft, a misunderstanding. I needed irrefutable proof, proof that came from their own mouths. With my system administrator privileges, I began a quiet audit. I backed up the entire Project Phoenix file to an encrypted drive and hid it. I set up an alert system to monitor all of Chad's activity on the company network. I combed through months of emails and communication logs. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon, they handed me the ultimate weapon themselves. Brooke, in her usual carelessness, called my office line instead of my cell. She must have thought I was out. She left a message on the company voicemail, a system that automatically records every message. Her voice was anxious and annoyed. "Chad, it's me. Why aren't you picking up? I was just looking at the Phoenix plan you sent. Are you sure we can sell the main building that fast? And that $30,000 you said I could advance myself from the company account this month, I'm not seeing it. Call me back now." I listened to the recording 3 times. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with a cold sense of victory. They had confessed, in their own voices, on my company's system. I saved the audio file, creating multiple backups. Now, I didn't just have their plan on paper. I had their voices, admitting to the plan and to embezzlement. My sword was forged. Now, all I had to do was wait for the final battle, and I knew exactly where it would be. The annual shareholder appreciation dinner, where they planned to announce their victory to the world. It would also be the place where they would face their judgment. In the weeks that followed, I became a consummate actress. I put on a mask of resignation. I went to the company every day, doing my job quietly and efficiently. I stopped arguing with my parents. When Chad requested reports, I provided them promptly and accurately. I played the part of the daughter who had accepted defeat, the manager who knew her place. My reluctant cooperation made them let down their guard. They saw me as a tamed lamb, never suspecting that a wolf was patiently waiting inside. That patience was fueled by preparation. Every night, I reviewed my evidence, arranging it into an undeniable logical sequence. I created my own short presentation, a counter-narrative to Chad's Project Phoenix. And I practiced. I practiced keeping my voice steady, controlling my breathing, hiding the simmering rage beneath a calm exterior. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me gloat. I would only show them the truth. Then the day arrived. The invitation to the Shareholder Appreciation and New Vision Announcement Dinner was delivered like a summons. It was a formal event held in a private room at the best restaurant in town. The guest list included about 30 people, employees who had been with the company from the beginning, key business partners, and a few close family friends. They were the people who had witnessed the company's ups and downs, the people my father respected most. They were the audience Brooke and Chad intended to use to legitimize their coup. I arrived alone, wearing a simple dark blue business dress. Nothing flashy. I wanted to be almost invisible when I walked in. The air in the room was thick with expensive perfume and expectation. Chad and Brooke were the center of the universe. They moved from table to table, shaking hands, laughing, radiating an aura of power and success. My father stood beside them, his face beaming with pride. My mother fluttered between tables, artfully telling stories about the talent and vision of her youngest daughter and future son-in-law. When they saw me, Brooke came over, placing a condescending hand on my shoulder. "Thanks for coming, Clara. This means a lot to the family." The dinner proceeded with lively conversation. I ate in silence, observing everything. I saw how the veteran employees looked at me with sympathy mixed with confusion. They didn't understand this sudden shift. After dessert, Chad stood up, lightly tapping his wine glass. The room fell silent. He began his speech, a perfectly polished oration about the future, about innovation, about taking David Miller's legacy to new heights. He thanked my father, praising him. He even mentioned me. And we must also give a special thanks to Clara, who has steadily steered the ship through the storm. Her dedication during this transitional phase has been invaluable. The words felt like a final pat on the head of a pet before it's put down. Then, he yielded the floor to the talented new CEO, my sister Brooke. Brooke stepped up, smiling radiantly. She thanked everyone, then her voice suddenly grew serious and somewhat formal. This was it. The performance was beginning. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, to move this company forward, we need more than just capital and strategy. We need absolute unity. We need a leadership team that shares a single vision and an ironclad belief. She paused, her eyes sweeping the room before landing on me. That is why, today, as the new leader, I must make an incredibly difficult decision. Over the past few months, we have noticed some worrying behaviors from Clara. An excessive possessiveness over business operations, a negativity and resentment that has affected the general morale. Whispers began to ripple through the room. I could feel dozens of pairs of eyes on me. Brooke continued, her voice full of fake sympathy. We believe Clara has been under a great deal of pressure, and perhaps that has affected her judgment. This instability, while understandable, is a risk the company cannot afford at this critical stage. Unstable. She used the word, a way to invalidate anything I might say later. Therefore, she concluded, her voice firm, after careful consideration, the new executive committee, comprised of my parents, Chad and myself, has voted unanimously. For the best interest of Miller Construction Supplies, we have decided that Clara will be temporarily stepping down from all her roles in the company to give her the time and space she needs to rest and reassess. The room was silent. A heavy, awkward silence. I had been publicly executed. Stripped of my role, humiliated and branded as unstable in front of everyone I respected. I sat there, alone at my table, under the spotlight they had created. They had fired all their shots. They had made me the villain. Perfect. Everything was going exactly as I had predicted. And they had no idea that their drama was only the opening act for a show of my own. The room was engulfed in a heavy, suffocating silence. Dozens of pairs of eyes were fixed on me, waiting for a reaction. They expected tears, pleas, or a weak burst of anger. I gave them none of it. I stood up, slowly, deliberately. I smoothed down my dress and felt the surprise ripple through the crowd. My composure, in this context, was more unsettling than any rage. I looked directly at Brooke, who was still standing at the podium, the victorious smile on her face beginning to falter. "Thank you, Brooke," I said, my voice ringing out clear and steady in the silence. "Thank you for clarifying the new board's position. Transparency is so important." I turned to the restaurant manager who was standing in the corner. "Sir, could you please connect my laptop to the projector? I'd just like to present a few final figures to complete my report." My professional and unexpected request flustered everyone. Chad and Brooke exchanged a look, a flicker of confusion on their faces. My father nodded mechanically, probably thinking this was just a pathetic last-ditch effort to save face. A few seconds later, the large projector screen behind the podium lit up, mirroring my laptop's display. "Before I hand things over," I continued, holding the wireless mouse, "I just wanted to summarize the journey we've been on." Click. The first slide appeared. It was a simple line graph. A red line in a steep, unmitigated nosedive, labeled Revenue Pre-Crisis. And a green line, starting from the very bottom, climbing slowly, steadily, and powerfully over the last 3 years, labeled Revenue Under Interim Management. The numbers didn't lie. I could hear appreciative murmurs from the business partners and veteran employees. I had just proven my competence, refuting the charge of instability. "As you can see, the company has had a strong recovery," I said. "But of course, the past is less important than the future. And luckily, I've had a chance to preview the vision the new leadership will bring." Click. The next slide appeared. My desktop vanished, replaced by the cover page of another presentation. The words, "Project Phoenix, a restructuring strategy," materialized. I saw Chad and Brooke stiffen. Their faces went pale. Click. The next slide. Phase 1. Liquidate all company real estate, including the main plant and head office. Click. The next slide. Phase 2. Reduce headcount by 60%. Prioritize termination of long-term, high-salary employees. Gasps and protests began to rise from the employees' tables. People who had dedicated their lives to the company were now seeing their own termination notices. Click. The final slide. Phase 4. Extract all remaining capital after 18 months. Dissolve the Miller Construction Supplies legal entity. The room erupted. My father shot to his feet, his face contorting from red to ashen. He stared at Chad, his eyes filled with disbelief. "Chad! What? What is this?" Chad stammered, trying to regain his composure. "Mr. Miller, this is just a draft. A misunderstanding. A worst-case scenario projection. Clara is twisting the truth." "A misunderstanding?" I asked, my voice still even. Perhaps some would argue this is just a thought exercise. In that case, let's hear from the thinker himself. I closed the presentation. I opened an audio file. The sound wave icon danced on the screen. And then, Brooke's anxious voice filled the room, crystal clear through the restaurant's speaker system. "Chad, it's me. I was just looking at the Phoenix plan you sent. Are you sure we can sell the main building that fast? And that $30,000 you said I could advance myself from the company account this month? I'm not seeing it. Call me back now." The silence after the recording ended was more terrifying than any scream. It was the silence of naked truth. Brooke looked like she was about to faint. Chad stood frozen, sweat beading on his forehead. And my father. His expression shifted from shock to pain, and finally, to a terrible, consuming rage and shame. He understood everything. He understood he'd been deceived, manipulated, and had nearly destroyed his own legacy. I calmly disconnected my laptop. I picked up the small USB drive from the table. I walked to my father, who was trembling with fury, and placed the drive in his hand. "I saved this company once. I won't stand by and watch them destroy it. Everything is on here. The rest is up to you." I turned to the employees and partners, who were now looking at me with a completely new respect. "Thank you all for your support over the years." Then I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I walked out of the banquet room door, leaving a storm of shouting, accusations, and the collapse of lies behind me. The sound of chaos faded as I walked down the hall. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I was walking, not on a path of sacrifice, but on the path back to myself. I was free. I didn't drive home. That house, with its walls full of betrayal and memories of meaningless sacrifice, was no longer my home. I drove straight to Leo's small apartment, the one place in the world I felt safe. The phone in my pocket buzzed incessantly. First it was my father, then my mother, then a frantic series of calls from Brooke. I didn't answer. I turned the phone off, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to take a deep breath, free from the weight of the world on my shoulders. The earthquake from that dinner spread with unstoppable speed. News travels fast in a small town. The business partners present at the dinner called my father the next morning, not to cancel contracts, but to express their support for me and demand a clear explanation about the company's future. The veteran employees, whose jobs I had fought to protect, publicly declared they would only trust my leadership. The consequences were swift and brutal. Chad fell first. Word of his hostile, fraudulent takeover attempt reached his partners in Los Angeles. The venture capital firm, which valued reputation above all else, fired him within a week. His dream of a lavish life built on the destruction of others evaporated into thin air. As for Brooke, she faced an even worse reality. It wasn't just the collapse of her personal brand. She had to face the wrath and immense disappointment of our parents, and more importantly, legal demands. To avoid a public lawsuit that would have completely destroyed the family's remaining reputation, a settlement was reached. Brooke had to repay every single dollar she had embezzled on a strict installment plan. She had to sell her luxury car, move out of her expensive LA apartment, and start over with a normal job. The glamour was gone, leaving only the stark truth. A week later, my parents knocked on the door of my apartment. They looked like they had aged a decade. The confidence and defensiveness were gone, replaced by exhaustion and regret. My father, the strong man I had always revered, couldn't look me in the eye when he spoke. "Clara," he began, his voice hoarse. I was wrong. I was blind. I didn't trust you, the only one who deserved my trust. I let my foolish pride and empty promises cloud my judgment. I'm sorry, not just for almost losing the company, but for hurting you. I'm sorry for not seeing your value. My mother burst into tears. I'm sorry, sweetie. I was so proud of superficial things that I forgot what truly mattered. I didn't protect you. I listened. Their apology was real, but I knew an apology couldn't erase the scars. I accept your apology, I said calmly. But things can't go back to the way they were. I'm not coming home. I will help you rebuild the company, but as its leader, on clear terms, not as a silent helper. Our boundaries have to be reset. 6 months later, life had found a new order. I officially became the CEO of Miller Construction Supplies. Under my management, the company not only stabilized but began to grow in a more sustainable and transparent direction. My father served as an advisor, and for the first time, he truly listened to and respected my opinions as a colleague. My mother began making clumsy but sincere efforts to reconnect, calling me just to check in, not to ask for something or to brag about Brooke. I had built a life of my own in a small apartment I decorated myself. My relationship with Leo deepened. He and my other friends became my chosen family, people who loved me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. If there's one thing I learned from this whole painful journey, it's this: family isn't always the people you share blood with. Real family are the people who act on your behalf, who respect your sacrifices and celebrate your victories as their own. I learned to conduct an emotional audit of my relationships. Ask yourself, is this relationship building you up or wearing you down? Is it a two-way street of support or a one-way street of sacrifice? Realizing the truth and setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary self-preservation. Sometimes you have to be willing to walk away from those who can't see your worth, so you can find the people who truly do. In the end, I didn't just save a company. I saved myself. And that is the most valuable legacy of all.